Have you ever just not felt like making anything? Really? What's that like? I've never experienced that. Just kidding. We all have periods that lack inspiration. Even me. I know, hard to believe, but yes, even I have times when I sit down at the drums or the piano and there's just nothing there. It's like my hands are empty and my brain is on vacation. So today I want to examine the questions of why this happens, can we prevent it, and how can we snap ourselves out of it? Let's get started. We're talking about inspiration and how fleeting it can be. Just the other day, I sat down at the drums to practice specifically because I have some gigs coming up and a tour, and I want to make sure I don't embarrass myself on stage. Not an easy ask. And I just kind of sat there hitting random things for a while, and I just didn't feel like doing anything, drums or otherwise. Usually, no matter what is going on, if I sit down to play, an idea will bubble up with minimal effort. That feeling is kind of like we're trying to see something beautiful, but there's an obstruction on our way. Like we know there's an amazing scene with a lake and a sunset, but there's a fence that we just can't see over. At least that's how it is for me. And I get to a point where trying to see over the fence feels futile, and so I stop trying temporarily. Is that a mistake? Should we give up when we're uninspired and feel exhausted or frustrated? I think everyone is different and every situation is unique. Certainly, there are times when we humans need a break. We might be dealing with some sort of trauma or loss. We're not machines. But other times we have just temporarily lost our mojo. And for that, we can certainly take some steps to get it back. Speaking of mojo, every time I hear that word, I think about Cuban slow-cooked pork. I know in that case it's pronounced mojo, but it still makes my mouth water whenever someone says mojo. And so if you hear my stomach growling during this episode, you'll know why. So in the example of myself before, I have a playlist of tunes that are both challenging and fun to play along with, and I know that if I put that on, I will feel inspired almost immediately. However, there are parallels in other art forms. Well, first of all, dance is an obvious one. I'm sure every choreographer has certain music that inspires them when they hear it. And there are also well-known cases of painters who look to music to inspire them. Piet Mondrian was a passionate music fan, and it found its way into his paintings. There's actually a great explainer video the BBC did with pianist Jason Moran. He shows how Mondrian's Boogie Woogie can be interpreted as a musical score for boogie woogie piano playing. Also, Matisse played the violin every day as a way to focus his mind before he started painting. This is more of a preventative measure to keep from losing his mojo. He made it part of his routine, which consistently helped cultivate the conditions he needed for creativity. But this doesn't have to just be music. It can work with anything we find inspiring. That's why it's good to take notes so we can find those things quickly when we need them. There's a great quote from Maya Angelou that I try to remember when I'm feeling uninspired. She said, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have." It's so true. And yet it can still be hard to get the process moving forward when we feel uninspired. The German illustrator Christoph Niemann has a project he did on Instagram he calls Sunday Sketches, where he uses random objects as starting points for his drawings. Like he takes a sock and draws the bottom half of an alligator so it looks like the sock is stuck on its head, or a pair of bananas becomes the hind legs of a horse. This idea of forcing ourselves into problem-solving mode by randomizing some aspect of the work is sure to give us a jolt of inspiration. It turns into a bit of a game, actually. Neiman was first in a Netflix series called Abstract, which I highly recommend checking out. It really looks behind the scenes at his process, and this is one of the tricks that he uses to stay inspired. Picking up some object lying around forces him to come up with solutions he wouldn't have thought of otherwise. At one point, there's a slow motion clip of him juggling, and you can hear him speaking in the background. He says, "When I was 12, I taught myself to juggle. At any given moment, there's one ball in the air. And this is something that I hate so much, this idea of no control. But this approach of not planning opens a new door. It's really, really hard, but it just leads to these magic moments." I love that quote. The fact that he hates giving up control, but knows that he has to do it to be creative. For me, thinking about Christoph Niemann gets me unstuck. This almost pragmatic approach to creativity I find refreshing. A quick side note on Niemann. My oldest daughter watched his documentary with me when she was like 13 or 14, and she was really getting serious about art. So she immediately found his email address and wrote to tell him how much he inspired her. About a week later, he sent her one of his drawings in the mail, which really meant a lot. What an incredibly gracious person. But this feeling of lost mojo, there are really so many factors that can have an impact on it. When we come back, we'll get into some of these other factors and how to handle them. This would be a great time to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe while you're at it. I'm posting new videos each week, so if you want to keep that creative engine humming, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any episodes. Actually, another way that I stay inspired is by having this weekly routine of making a podcast episode and turning it into a video and creating bonus material for Patreon. I'm trying to be consistent on these different platforms, and just the act of that puts me in a creative mindset. So I recommend having a regular outlet, which could be something like a commitment to post a new sketch on Instagram every day for a month, or uploading a new song to Bandcamp once a month until you have a 12-song album at the end of the year. That's actually a good idea. Maybe I should do that. I don't know. But I do have 4 studio albums of my own, which you can get on Bandcamp, and I'll link to that below. And actually, I have a live album, which is a free download. So check the description for those links. And now, back to Keep the Flow. When we're young, we can stay up late and write or draw. For me, it was listening to music and writing music. I would notice the sun coming up and take that as my cue to hit the hay. I'm not sure if this is just a rite of passage that all creative people go through, but it's not healthy. That much I know. I'm pretty sure it's partially why I started getting migraines. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I'm confident in prescribing consistent healthy sleep habits, because sometimes explaining a lack of inspiration is as simple as we didn't sleep well the night before. Some of this is beyond our control. If you're a parent, you know what I mean. There are sleepless nights. But even the slightest interruption can have an impact. Like, for instance, last night, my dog Penny woke me up to go outside. No big deal. I get up, I open the door, I wait as she goes out to pee. She comes back in, I close the door, then I have to pee. By the time I get back in bed, I'm wide awake. I can fall asleep again pretty quickly, but this sleep disturbance is noticeable when I get up the next day. I guess this is why people install doggy doors. Icelandic weather doesn't really allow for that. However, during the day when we let Penny out, we leave the front door unlocked and she can let herself back in. And we also trained her to close the door after herself, which is a nice party trick. But that brings me to the next factor, which is diet and nutrition. And I'm a little hesitant to get into that. I hate when people tell me what to eat, and I know that I could improve my own diet, so I don't want to be a hypocrite. However, I'll just say this. Since January this year, I cut way down on alcohol. I wouldn't call myself sober. I haven't eliminated it altogether, but I realized that I was drinking too much, and I switched to non-alcoholic beer. At first I thought I'll just only drink on the weekends, but then I noticed how much better I felt and I wanted to keep feeling that way. Honestly, I don't think I would have started this podcast and YouTube channel if I hadn't made that change. And when I do have a beer, the next day when I feel that lack of inspiration, I know what's going on. And even though I'd rather have the inspiration, it's good to have a logical explanation for it instead of wondering, have I lost the magic? Or what's wrong with me? Man, I wasted so much time and energy saying that phrase to myself over the years. What's wrong with me? Which leads perfectly into the next factor, which is confidence. When we lack the belief in ourselves that what we create is worthy of our time and effort, it's really hard to feel inspired. When we waste time doom scrolling, looking at the lives of our colleagues, their accomplishments, and instead of feeling happy for them, compare ourselves unfavorably to them, when we belittle ourselves with our internal dialogue, telling ourselves how much we suck or how we'll never accomplish X, Y, or Z, how can we expect to feel inspired to create? Inspiration never arises out of negativity. It's always a result of positive energy. I heard a great quote the other day from this psychiatrist who's on YouTube, Dr. Alok Kanoja, goes by Dr. K, much easier. He said, "You can't control the result." Just that idea alone is really inspiring to me. You can't control the result. You can only control your actions. We make the work, and the work turns out one way or another, but we've done our job. We can't write a New York Times bestseller. We can only write a book. We can't paint a picture that sells for millions of dollars in an auction. We can only paint a picture. We can't make a Grammy Award-winning album. We can only record an album. And that's enough. Whatever happens to the work once we're done, we've done our jobs. The expectation is the enemy. When we have expectations for our work and they fall short, we feel disappointed. Or they exceed our expectations and then we've moved the goalpost for the next thing. Either way, we are harmed by our expectations. Sometimes our current lack of inspiration is the result of previous expectations. The memory of being let down in the past, or the memory of the last great thing we did, and the fear that we won't achieve something like that again, these expectations get in the way of our inspiration. They act as an inhibitor for the feeling of being inspired. And this is for sure something that I struggle with. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I have everything under control. I don't. But it helps to be aware of it. The only thing we can do is try. That's all I've got today. I'll be on tour with Sunna Gunnlaugs Trio at the beginning of May, so check our website for details. I'll link to it. We're going to Denmark, Germany, Spain, and the UK, so if you're in one of those countries, come say hi. If you've made it this far, leave me a comment and let me know what you do to get your mojo back. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.